Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, just returning to you from a motorcycle chase.
Yeah, you do look a bit windswept and sweaty, Cam.
I am indeed, yes. Vroom vroom, baby.
Although none of us quite have Tom Cruise's hair in Mission Impossible 2.
I don't think any living human being actually does. I have to feel like that was state-of-the-art, advanced CG that has never since been replicated.
Nor should it be. This should remain the pinnacle of CG.
They smashed those programs once they were finished completing that hair.
They lit the fuse and they blew them up. They did light the fuse.
It was like those mob movies where they do the cleanup, where people just started getting picked off in like a montage.
Right.
That's how it went with that technology. Everyone who helped develop that technology just mysteriously vanished.
And never to be heard from again. But Cam, we're actually going to be hearing from someone because we're actually back with some more mission for you. We always like to promise you an interview whenever we can get one. And we're talking about Mission Impossible 3 this week. So who do we have joining us?
Yes, we are joined by Arthur Anderson, a man of many talents, but most notably in terms of this interview, the first assistant director on Mission Impossible 2 and the co-producer on Mission Impossible 3, although when you listen to the interview, you'll find out he did a number of jobs on Mission Impossible 3.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those strange situations where someone's job changes between films.
Yeah.
Which Arthur takes to like a duck to water, not a problem at all. And it's interesting to get into hearing about what he contributed to both films, and they're both sort of separate contributions in their own way. But it just goes to show how trusted he is by the Mission family.
Yeah, and you're going to kind of get a sense of this from this interview, the vagaries of credits. Because while he's listed, say, as a co-producer on Mission Impossible 3, what he tells you about what he actually did on that movie spans multiple different departments in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's get to it, folks. Arthur Anderson, you're up. Cam, roll the interview. And joining us now on the show, one of the few people that can say they have their name on Mission Impossible 2 and 3, it is Mr. Arthur Anderson. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Hey, good guys. How you doing?
All the better for having you on the show, sir. We have a lot of questions about Mission. Mission Impossible 2 is a bit of an interesting one. I'm a big fan of the film, and it's always interesting to sort of unpack what happened with that film and what happened behind the scenes. So we'll get to that. But the first question I always ask when we have people who are involved in making films, because it's a career. It's your life. It becomes your life making films. What inspired you to get into the business of filmmaking?
Well, I couldn't have been further from Hollywood. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. I went to college at USC. I tell people I went to USC. I don't tell it was University of South Carolina. It wasn't USC Film School. And I was always interested in entertainment, and I got involved in stand-up comedy. I always liked comedy. So in college, I got into doing stand-up comedy. And a guy who roomed next to me worked at a radio station. There were nightclubs who wanted him to do commercials for them, and they were particularly interested in comedy commercials. So we got together and we would write these scripts for radio comedy spots, 28-second spots, that then led to advertising agencies hearing that because the really worked well for the nightclub. So then we started doing radio commercials for other products. I mean, everything from shoes to cars, the concrete to condos. And then we went into TV commercials based off of that, which we knew nothing about. We kind of had to fake our way through that. So we had got Lenny Lipton's filmmaking book, and we were doing car commercials. There were no camera cars back on the East Coast back then. So we'd take pickup trucks, have my dad make reflector boards in the back. We'd have to find a really smooth road. You'd have to shoot in a direction where the sun was blasting right into the people. It was like, 1,000-foot candles in there, but look like you're having a good time driving the car. So we did TV commercials, kind of faked our way through that. And after I left that adventure, film came to my hometown. I cast a bunch of my actors in it, started working on the set as a production assistant. The second week, both assistant directors got sick. And they said, well, wow, who knows how to run a set? So I raised my hand. So my second week in the film business, I was running a film set. And the first assistant director off of that film took me to New York. I started working with New York with some great filmmakers as like Billy Friedkin, Paul Mazursky, and I was working as a production assistant on those films. So I was blessed that I went to work with some A filmmakers right off the bat. And off of that, I came out from contacts I made there. I ended up coming out to Los Angeles as a production assistant on Urban Cowboy. So I worked on Texas and that, and at the end of the film, we came out to California. Then got into the Directors Guild of America based on my days, worked as a second assistant director, first assistant director, then started writing, directing television. And that's kind of my journey out here. It was all about, everybody has their own different stories, but it's all about the people you meet, connections you have, and whatever your interest is in. A lot of times you have to modify that goal to what you have initially. So as a production assistant, what I always did was I tried to find out what was going wrong, see how I could fix it, right? And when people see that and they see you're taking an initiative that goes outside of your the scope of your job, they start giving you more responsibilities. They recognize, because when you're making other people's life, because it's such a hard business, it's such hard work, 14 hours a day, they look at that, they're looking for somebody to make their lives easier, right? So you just try to make yourself an invaluable person in every position you find yourself in, and that will eventually lead you to your goals. If you want to become a director, you may start out as a assistant in the script department, if it's a television show, something like that. But it'll lead you to contacts that will then lead you to what your ultimate goal is. And listen, the film business is really hard. You have to have a passion for it, because you work. When you work, you make great money, and then you're off for months, and then strikes happen, and you're off for more months. So, you also have to have a game plan for what you're going to do for those months that you're not working, because it's, a lot of times it's feast or famine. So you have to be like the squirrel. You have to store away a lot of stuff so that when, a period like the strike comes, or 6 months you're not working, you still have a way to survive. So it's also about looking for other passive sources of income to be able to survive those those desert moments that you drive through the desert. So that's kind of how I ended up out in Hollywood. And I was very blessed, I can say, to work with great filmmakers in film and television. Learned a lot, and it's been great, all the people that I've had the opportunity to work with.
And you named some major directors there. I'm curious, like, along the way, was there anyone who stands out maybe more so as like kind of the mentor you look back on, or was it just a general learning curve from director to director?
It was a general learning curve from director to director. You learn different things. I mean, Billy Friedkin, he had a real eye for mystery and intrigue. Having done the Exorcist movies and other movies, he really had an eye for intrigue. Paul Mazursky was a real actor's director, because he came from an acting background. Michael Apted, I worked as second assistant on Continental Divide. All of them have different skill sets, and the great thing about working with great directors is you get to learn their strong points in everything that they do, and then in your own career, you get to take all those little things you've learned from them and incorporate. That's one great thing about working as a first assistant director, is you work closely with the director, the DP, production designer, costume designer. So you see it all come together. It's how you get to witness how all the sausage is made from all the different departments. And it's really a great training ground to become a director, because, being a director, it's a benevolent dictatorship in film. I mean, the director makes a film. In television, you come through and you try not to wreck the car that the showrunner has built, right? So it's like they give you a Rolls Royce, they put you on a NASCAR track, and they say don't put any dents in the car. Okay, so you just try to fulfill your responsibility to stick to the show's conventions. So it's two different mediums, but boy, I've learned a lot of stuff from great television directors, and I've been able to go amongst all the mediums, and it also transitioning into the internet space of short films, internet broadcast, television features. So, but the most I learned was from really good directors, and taking pieces of their knowledge from all their skill sets and then adapting those into my MO.
It's crazy just looking back on people, directors we've interviewed over the years, who a lot of them seem to have started in commercial work. And doing commercials and art and things like that, and it must be a really good, interesting way of learning your craft, working in these sort of short 30-second, 1 minute sort of slots, getting a message across very quickly.
Well, it is because a commercial is a 28 and a half second feature film, right? And it's really difficult because you've got to get a hook. You got act one, act two, and act three. But you have 28 seconds to get through all that stuff. First, you have to have a visual that hooks the audience. So they're not going to turn the TV off. Then you get to get the message across of the brand, right? So um, I remember when I was in college and we were working with an advertising agency. There was a chicken company that wanted to go up against Colonel Sanders, which was tough because Colonel ruled back then, man. Chicken was everything. So we had to come up with a visual and an image that would bring that across. So finally, all night we're sitting up in the studio. We have this pitch to make to the agency, and we had the buckets of chicken out. We're looking at all the different parts and said, well, what's unique and different about this that we can get a hook that we can sell? And we looked at all the parts of the chicken, and finally we said, and we grabbed a chicken breast. I said, a breast in your hand will put a smile on your face. We do a big billboard about bite the chicken. So we came up with this whole jingle, a breast in your hand will put a smile on your face, a golden skillet, the fried chicken place. We're working with an ad agency guy on this. And so we go in and we do the pitch, and they go, that's a little too suggestive, but we could get by with a leg. So it became a leg in your hand will put a smile on your face. So there's a hook, there's a brand, and we had all the people enjoying the chicken. So we had, get the hook at act 1, 2, and 3 in the commercial, and did it 28 and a half seconds, and did a bunch of radio and print ads for that, and it worked. It sold lots of chicken. So it's the same thing in a feature. You have to have a good hook, and particularly in today's market, it's really tough. So and streaming, what's happening to the film market today is what happened to the record industry 20 years ago, right? The MP3s it's always about what's the disruptive technology that's coming in, right? So for the record industry, it was MP3s, and you could download anything. Well, now it's streaming, binge watching TV, so that's the new thing. And so a new disruptive technologies come in where the major studios are having to make major adjustments. I mean, you look at what's happening at Disney right now. They're having to look at the whole structure of their business and go, okay, we're losing a lot of money. How do we trim this thing down, and how do we reach a new audience? So it's all about marketing. So it's as you look at that and you start going through those changes, you have to say, well, how do I fit into this? And if I'm going to write a story now, I'm going to sell a project, how am I going to pitch this? So you really have to go in. If you're selling a script now, you really have to go in with a marketing campaign. All right, here's my target audience we're going to go for. Here's the budget range I think we can make this film in, right? And here's a compelling story, and why. Here's the hook, and here's why people are going to watch. So it's just like a commercial. You're selling a brand, you're trying to sell it. So everybody's getting to get a little bit more savvy now about how they're selling their projects and what platform you're going to. Like you still have your big tentpole pictures, like a lot of the big ones I've worked on, 150, $200 million pictures. But now, there's a big demand for features that are in the 15 to $25 million range. Well, so you've got to scale your script and your project a whole lot differently. You still got to keep, if you're doing a thriller, you still got to keep the mystery, intrigue, suspense, but you can't have all the big production design elements that you would normally use. You have to be really smart about what's the production design going to be? How's this going to fit together so I can scale everything into that? I'm going to have one big star. I'm going to get like 2 B stars who are up and coming, who I know are going to be good in the future. How do I pair all that together? And what's a location I can shoot at where I get the biggest tax credit? So I'm really getting more bang for my buck for the $25 million, because I'm going to get tax credit, so it'll really be 30 million. So it's really complicated now on how, particularly for the lower end projects you're putting together, about how you put it. It takes a lot of work, a lot of thinking, and you also have to measure who you're going to pitch this to. What studio is going to be Lionsgate? Am I going to go to Paramount? What's happening with them? So you have to do some due diligence to find out what are they looking for, and how's this project going to fit into their plan. And because listen, but we're in a recession right now. Everybody's saying, well, the numbers still, no. You go to the grocery store, and the price of I buy this coffee. It's a 2-pound coffee. I've been buying from Coffee Bean for years, and a year ago it was $18.95 for 2 pounds. Now it's $30. So what does that tell you? Okay, so we're in a recession. We're definitely into inflation. So everybody, all the studios are trimming down. They're looking ways to save money and to make money. So your job as a producer or director, if you're going in to pitch a project, is how am I going to service the studio? How am I going to maximize the money they're going to put into this project to make money for them? Because that's it. That's like commercial. You're selling products. A film is a product, and you're looking for an audience to buy it, right?
Right.
Well, I'm curious to sort of get us to Mission Impossible, but I would assume, and I could be wrong here, that the story for you starts with John Woo.
Right.
So how did you get connected with John originally?
I got connected with John on Face Off. The producer on that film was Barry Osborne. The production manager was Marty Ewing, who had worked with both of them, and they were looking for an AD to work with John. So they contacted me, came in, I interviewed John, and had a great meeting with him. They called me up and said, "Hey, John wants to do the picture with you," and so that's how I got started with him. It was a great experience because John had a chance in pre-production to go through. He had storyboarded the whole movie. So when we got there and we started working on it, we really had his vision of the film to put it together. So we put it together. There was a big boat chase at the end, and Barry and Marty and I and John had talked about it and determined that the best way to accomplish that and to get it done the most economical way was to shoot the boat chase second unit before we started shooting. So Billy Burton was the second unit director on that. We put it all together. Billy started shooting. The great thing about that was, and since we were in prep, John could go work with Billy, just go through, and model the action for that all at chase. So that was shot 2 weeks before we started filming, and then when we actually started filming near the end of the schedule, we had 3 days of 2 units going, where John Travolta would be with one unit, Nicolas Cage would be with the other, and we inserted them into the whole chase. Well, the great thing about doing that chase in advance is John cut it together, showed it to the studio, and they had a great sales piece because it was a dynamic. I don't know if you remember from Face Off,
Oh yeah,
ending to the movie. So the studio was really excited about it. It was a tough shoot. I mean, there was tons of action in it, but John and Nicholas were great, and Joan Allen. We had a great cast. They were all up for it, and we came in pretty much on schedule and on budget. And it was one of my favorite films to work with John, because it was one where truly there wasn't that much that had to be done to the script. It was a good script, well written. And John had really had a chance to take his time and storyboard it, and it was just a dynamic, really great entertainment piece of filmmaking.
I hadn't actually realized that Billy Burton worked on Face Off, because he would work with you guys again on Mission Impossible 2.
Yeah. And he had done Broken Arrow, I think, with John before that, and Hard Target. Yeah, so he had done a bunch.
Right.
He's a good second unit director.
Well, I would love to know, just from your point of view, because you've worked with many directors, and just like, what is sort of the atmosphere of a John Woo set, maybe in comparison to other filmmakers you've worked with?
John really encourages creativity. Casting your crew is as important as casting your cast. So we really take a lot of time to look at all the department heads and understanding. There's two methods of filmmaking as director. One, you yell and scream, trying to make people fearful of making a mistake, and you think they give 110%, or you encourage people to bring up their creativity to its highest potential, right? You trust them. You give them what your vision is. You say, okay, help me create that. And if you can do better, do that. So John comes from that style of filmmaking. And he's a great humanitarian, just a great guy, just a great human being, great guy to work with. And so that's what he encourages. And he tries as much as he can to give everybody his vision of the film by doing storyboards. And a lot of the means, the things that we can't storyboard, we'll rehearse a lot of the action with stunt doubles and work out a menu of what we want to happen, so that, because when we get on the set, the last thing you want to do in an action film is trying to be able to figure out what you're going to do. That's a recipe for disaster. So in an action film, you want 90% of everything to be prepped during the prep period, and then you have 10% chance to improvise and improve once you get on the set. So everybody loves working with John. Everybody wants to give 110%. And at the end of the day, normally everybody goes home with a smile on your face going, wow, we really did some cool stuff today. And some things we invented that we didn't even design to do, but wow, that really came out great.
Now, for people who maybe aren't aware, you're working with John Woo as an assistant director. What is sort of your standard workday like? What are kind of the duties that you'll fulfill if there is such thing as a normal day?
That's the great thing about filmmaking. No 2 days are ever the same. So with John, my relationship's a little bit different because I come from a writing background, because before I get into features, I wrote and directed episodic television. So for John, the action is a character in the film, right? I mean, the action is what the barrier that the main character is going to come up against. It causes them to have to make a decision. The way I've worked things before is not going to work now because I'm running into a barrier in the plot, and it informs their transformational arc of how they're going to change throughout the film, right? So the first thing we do is we'll go in, we'll tear the script apart into all its elements. Then we'll go through the scenes and say, okay, what kind of action here is going to present a problem to the main character, seemingly it's an impossible problem that they have to overcome, and then what action are we going to create that is going to go, it's going to be incredible action that's going to help them go what above their normal talents and skill set should do, that they have to achieve to overcome that obstacle, right? And that's going to be a stair-stepped ladder that's going to go to the climax of the film, right? So you've got to keep that tension going the whole way through. You got to get the audience emotionally involved with the characters. Say, oh boy, I'm hoping the best for him, but I hope this bad thing doesn't happen that's coming up. And how's he going to get up? This is impossible. How's that going to happen? So it's a lot of meetings about that and trying to figure that out. So the first thing, we go through the script, we say, how can we, and not that the writer's done a bad job. It's just our job to take, that's a blueprint, and then we're going to build a house off the blueprint, but we're going to build a better house that's on the blueprint. So that's what we do. First, we sit down and we go through the script. We go through all those elements. What's the incredible journey going to be? What's the intrigue going to be? What's the mystery? What's the suspense? How do we keep the tension up? So we go through and we go through the whole script like that. Then we come up with the action. Then we'll bring in a lot, and a lot of these meetings involve the second unit director, the stunt coordinator at different times. First, John and I will go through it, do a pass. Then we bring them in, and we sit down with if it's a war film, we'll have toy soldiers. If it's an action chase scene, we'll have toy cars. So everything we did in the sandbox for 5, we're doing it around a table so we can get paid a little better. And then off of that, then I'll write that new action into script form. We'll bring the storyboard artists in. We'll go through, we'll storyboard those elements, showing them with the cars and stuff and taking pictures and angles. And then I'll send those script pages to the writer so he can incorporate those into the script while the storyboard artist is storyboarding it. Then when the storyboards are done, I take those storyboards and I break them down in their components. Okay, these boards are going to be done with second unit. Once the second unit is done with this, maybe they'll precede us. Sometimes they come after us. Then first unit's going to come in. We're going to take the actors. We'll insert them into the action that second unit's done. And we need a visual effects unit to go shoot all these plates in another country for all these things we need to do. So it's very busy, and prep times it's really compressed now, because you get, as budgets decrease and everybody wants to be more efficient, you get less and less prep time. So it used to be 16 weeks. Well, now maybe it's 12 to 10 weeks, so the days are very busy. Meanwhile, while you're doing that, you're having to find all the locations, you're casting the actors, you're building the sets, so you're looking at set diagrams, and then you have to bring the stunt people with that, because you're designing a set. You're going to be blowing people up, you need wire rigs and all that. So as they're designing the set, you've got to figure out, all right, well, how are we going to put trusses up? So when we blow this person up, I want to put them on a ratchet, and I want to ratchet them across the room and knock them through this glass. So there's mechanical, special effects, and visual effects all combined. So you're having meetings as you're going through each of these sequences, bringing all these departments in. All right, here's how we figured this out. Here's how many outfits, how many bullet hits we're going to need. So all the elements that go into an action scene, you have meetings about those. Once you've got the boards done, you go through, you dig out all the elements, because then everybody has to do budgets and go, wow, this is going to cost this much for this sequence. So you put all those sequences together, you get the final budget, and you go, oh wow, okay, we're $2 million over budget. What are you gonna do? So then you start going through those sequences. Okay, what's absolutely necessary? Some babies have to go into the budget volcano, right? So then you go in and you start taking pieces out of the sequences. Here's what we really need to sell this story point we're trying to make, to get the action and the story and the plot, and to service the characters' transformational arc. And you pull those pieces out that you think you can still tell the story with, and then you come in and you look at the budget. Okay, well now we've got it down to close, and so that's the process of making a John Woo movie, and mainly on other action films. It's exciting, I'll tell you.
You've given me a question I'll circle back to when it comes into the proverbial babies into the volcano when it comes to ideas. But let's transmute that over to Mission Impossible slightly, because that's your next feature film after Face Off is Mission Impossible 2. But just to sort of preface that a little bit, were you aware of the Brian De Palma film from '96 and the TV show that had come before it?
Yes. Oh yeah. I grew up during the genre of the TV show. I loved it. I watched it every week. And then I'd seen Mission 1, and I thought they did a great job on that. And it's always difficult with an action franchise because you're always having to up your game with each one, you know. And the great thing about Tom is, I mean, Tom understands story, he understands character, he understands how to promote a film, and he's always there 100%. You know, the biggest arguments I ever had with Tom is because he does 99.9% of his own stunts, you know, and they're called stunts because they're dangerous. You know, you have a wire rig that's 140 yards long, and there's a person on the end of it, and you hire the best people you can. And but you know, there's always the thing, the wire could fail, you know, and your life is on the end of that wire. But the good thing about Tom is he's in the best shape of probably any actor I've ever worked with. He stays in great shape, so I could trust him to be able to do those stunts, and I know that he's physically capable of doing them. But you know, there's always an element of risk in stunts. That's why they call them stunts. But he's physically able to do it. So of anybody who would do 99.9% of their own stunts, he's a guy I could trust to do that.
And he's still riding motorcycles off of cliffs onto
Yeah.
trains now. The guy's still going.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think each year he gets in better shape than he was the year before, you know. But he understands storytelling, you know. And man, it's not easy to take a big action franchise to that and keep up in the game every film you do, you know. So we knew we had to do that. We came into Mission 2, and you know, we knew we had to create bigger, more dynamic action in a foreign country. You know, we're in Australia for most of the filming for that. Some of the chases and stuff we brought back to LA, but it was hard work, you know, and it was a big film, and there were the studio took a big risk on us going to Australia to do this, but it paid off, and you know, the film did very well.
Well, there's a question there. I'm not sure everyone would know, but why Australia? Why was that choice made?
Well, I don't exactly know what the genesis of that was. I know that Tom had always wanted to do a film in Australia, and I believe that's how we ended up there. You know, because I know he was married to Nicole, who's from Australia, and so they hadn't really done any giant action pictures yet. We were the first big film that went into Fox Studios there. And so it was challenging because you know, they didn't necessarily have all the equipment we would normally have here. We had to bring some in. We had to modify things, but the people there are great. We had a great time. They worked really hard, and it was a difficult shoot. I mean, we did a lot of things out on the streets and stuff, and a lot of mechanical. Most of the effects in that were, you know, we did it practically. It wasn't a lot of visual effects in that.
Yeah, and that's something I noticed with your work is when I go across the films, most of them are practical effect driven versus like CG heavy. Is that intentional on your part, or is that just kind of the way it's worked out?
No, that's intentional on John's part. John, you know, he uses visual effects when he has to, but he likes the actors to be able to react to action that's happening to them. You know, it's a whole different thing when you're in a car and you're practically, you get a camera behind you. You might have a blind driver, you might not. and you're going through city streets in a chase, it's a different dynamic for an actor and a different performance that they give, as opposed to it's an actor in a car on a stage. It's all blue screen, green screen, or projected outside, and they're trying to react to what's going on. You'll never get the G forces and the physics involved in a real chase. And so John prefers the actor to be involved in the action because he feels like he gets a better performance out of it. And I agree. And even in the things I direct, I much rather prefer having physical and mechanical effects than having visual effects.
And you speak about, upping the ante with Mission Impossible 2. And I remember seeing the movie opening weekend, and it felt much bigger even than the first one. And I was a big fan of the original. And you're talking about how it's a difficult shoot. And I'm just curious, like, what were the biggest challenges you faced along the way? Are the obvious things? I think a lot of viewers would say, oh, well, maybe the motorcycle chase. But was it something perhaps that would surprise people?
Well, I think the hardest thing we did was the motorcycle chase and the joust at the end of the film, because that's something that had never been done before. And we were out scouting. Interesting. Before the weekend before we started filming, studio came down because the budget was really up there. They decided that the ending we had written cost too much, so we threw the ending out literally Friday before we started shooting. So we spent the rest of the film on the weekends doing the whole process. All right, what action can we do? What can we afford? Where can we do it? What's the story going to be? Storyboard it, final locations, the whole rigmarole, right? So we come up with the action, and we're scouting a location one weekend. We're just trying to find dynamic locations that'll help us inform what the action is going to be. So we come up with this clip that looks over the ocean. And it's like 100-foot drop. Oh, this is really cool. And John says to Brian Smurfs, who's a second unit director, and myself, and I believe John Cunningham, my second, was there, and Billy Burton was there, the second unit director. They were all sitting around talking, and John says, hey, I'd like to take these for the ending. I'd like it'd be like two knights facing off each other. Where I'd like the motorcycles to come at each other. They jump off. They go to. I said, wow, that's really interesting. Unique. And then we walked off. We're looking at other things, and Brian, the stunt coordinator, says, how are we going to do that? I said, what do you mean? I said, I think he was kidding. I think he was just saying as a metaphor. He says, no, I think he really wants to do that. I walked and said, John, you weren't serious about the motorcyclists jousting and the guys. He says, yeah, I really like to do that. I said, but John, two guys on a motorcycle, they come towards you, they jump up. I said, just the G forces that would kill them. He puts his hand over his shoulder and says, oh, Arthur, it's a movie. They'll believe it. I said, I guess you're right. They will. So it was a huge deal because we had to figure out with the effects guys and stunts, we had to get a track with the two motors. They were on a track for the two motorcycles coming to each other. And then at the critical point, they had to pop up on the back wheel. And then the actors had to come off the motorcycles and look like they crash into each other and fall over. So to do that, we had to have two construction cranes with a wire up top. And the actors had two wires on them. One was to lift them off the bike to get them up in the air. And the second wire was hooked to their back at the cinder rig to slow them down. So when they jumped up and they came at you, they stopped like 6 inches apart. So that was tremendously complicated and dangerous. And but we designed it, they worked it. It took weeks to put it together. But I mean, it was a great sequence, and it worked. And and Tom did that himself. He was on the wire going up against the double for Through Gray Scott, and it worked, and it was great. Then they fall off the cliff, they fall on the ground, they fight, they kick the gun up, but I think that was one of the hardest sequences we did because it was just so demanding, never been done before. So design something that had been done and keep it safe enough where it can be accomplished without seriously hurting someone.
You mentioned being sort of stretched and having to come up with basically a whole new way of doing an action scene there, putting that together. Was there any other moments during the production of Mission Impossible 2 where you had to sort of improvise and come up with something different?
Well, the knife in Tom's eye was something we improvised. That was, and that came up. We were shooting on that cliff, and the winds would get up on that cliff top like 70 miles an hour. So we're going, oh, we don't have anything to shoot today. And I can't remember if it was John or Tom who came up. He says, "Hey, what about the knife in the eye?" I said, "Well, we're going to do that on stage, and we're going to try to do it as a visual effect. Why don't we do it practically?" I said, "What?" So uh, I get the stunt coordinator Brian and Rock Galati, who was our armor, who did the knife and all that, and Tom really wanted to do it practically, so we had to build what looked like a swing set with a pole over the top with a cable on it that was hooked into the knife that would go literally right on Tom's eye, and to the point it was just tickling his eyebrows, right? And I mean, it was a gut churner because we made it as safe as we could. Tom's head was in the sand, but it was really the knife there. And if he hiccuped, an involuntary hiccup, he was that close, he could have injured his eye. So that was one of the improvisational things we did that gave me a couple of nights of lost sleep after that. I was just so happy when it was over. And I asked John, we're watching the monitor at one point, and we cut. I said, "Hey, John, how was that?" He says, "Oh, after the knife went down, I couldn't even look anymore. It's okay. It's good." So those are the kind of things you run into during the course of your filmmaking schedule that you have to you improvise. You don't always want them to be quite that exciting, but it turns out that way. It'll look great in the film. So.
And is there like a freedom that comes from having a star with the clout of Tom Cruise as the producer on the film as well?
Oh, absolutely. Because when you need something, listen, Tom's not going to waste money. He's all about conserving money, just using what you need. But when you get into a situation where if we really want to make this look cool, we need this tool. And one of those situations was we were in on mission 3. We were in Shitang, China, and when we're doing him coming out of that window and he runs through all those people, we Vic Armstrong he was the action unit director, and I was a producer on that one, and I was the second unit director to clean up everything the first unit or second unit didn't get, or the action unit didn't get. And we went there. We needed we figured we were going to need a cable cam, and it wasn't going to be a standard cam. It was like 800 feet across water. It was a big rig, and it wasn't something that was budgeted for. And but I called Stratton Leopold, Paula Wagner, who were the producers back in LA. I said, "This is a tool. We really need to do this, and it's going to cost a lot of money, but we need it to make this work." And so they talked to Tom, and we got it. And the great thing was JJ was so efficient with his shooting; he'd saved a lot of money, so it enabled it easier to say yes to be able to get a tool to accomplish that. So yeah, so it definitely helps. I mean, if you needed something and the studio gave you any problem, you could go to Tom, and Tom would call, and the next day or whatever you needed, that piece of equipment would show up. Yeah, that was great.
I suppose maybe my last sort of question of Mission Impossible 2 before we drift on over to Mission Impossible 3 a little bit is, we've mentioned what John Woo was like to work with as a director. We've mentioned Tom Cruise, his abilities on set, but there's a much bigger cast in play here. Tandy Wade Newton, Doug Ray Scott. There's a wonderful photo on your IMDb of you and Tandy Wade at the back of a boat with like Sydney Opera House in the background, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
Really lovely photo. But just any memories of working with sort of the rest of the cast?
That's the thing is we're very careful on choosing cast, and Tandy was just, I mean, she was wonderful to work with. She's a talented actress. I mean, really skilled. I mean, she's had a great career and continues to do great work. Ving Rhames, an awesome guy to work with, right? Dougray Scott, really good. So that we all had fun working together because it was a creative effort of a team effort coming together. And we all had just a great time. The work is really hard, and so it's great to have people who are on the same page as you are when you're working on something that difficult, and that in the end it's going to come out great. But that's why putting your cast together is so important, that they had that synergy of working together.
And was there a satisfaction that came just from, like, the movie was a mega hit at the box office, just that really positive reception as well?
Yeah, that's when you've really done your job. You always wonder, and if it's going to turn out okay, and you wait that first weekend to see how the box office numbers come in. And when they started coming in, I said, okay, this is working. We've done a good job. Our mission here is complete.
There might be a third one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, Spyhards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Well, Scott, with Inside Out 2 blowing up the box office, now seems like an ideal time to go back to the beginning of Pixar. That's right, we're going to look at 1995's Toy Story and see if it still leaves us buzzing.
So strap on your Condor Man wings and soar into the future with us over at patreon.com/spyhards.
But before Big O zaps us with a red pulsating laser, let's get back to the Spy Jinx. And you mentioned, you were a producer on Mission Impossible 3. How did that kind of come to pass?
So I was supposed to be directing a film for John, a horror film down in Louisiana, and it was in the early development stages. I got a call from Stratton Leopold, who's the executive producer of the film, that they were going to do Mission 3. This was like early January, February. The film had to be completed by December, or late November, early December, because they had a May release of the film. So they asked if I would come in and break the script down and see what the best way, how could they accomplish that by, Thanksgiving. So I came in for about 10 days, broke the script down, went through, and it was really complicated. It was shot in a number of countries. It was Germany, Italy, China, US, the East Coast of the US. So I went through, broke it down. I came up with a game plan to be able to accomplish that the second unit would have to always precede the first unit to get the action done. They bring the actors in, insert them into that. And there were visual effects units in China, there were action units in China. First unit had to go there. I needed a second unit in Germany. So I put all this on what I call a big block chart to get it all organized, and so we could finish. The movie could be finished by Thanksgiving. And then I met with Stratton, Paula, and JJ in the conference room, and it took me about 20 minutes. I talked to JJ through it, and he said, okay, that was good. And then he took Paula and Stratton out and asked him if there's any way for me to stay on for the film to kind of oversee this. Well, unfortunately, Katrina hit New Orleans, so it wiped out my opportunity to direct that. So I was able to stay on Mission 3. So then I got the supervised units, and then direct the second unit to clean up anything that the first unit or VIX unit didn't get. So that's how I ended up on that movie.
Interesting, because it's a bit of there's a lot of information on what you did with Mission Impossible 2, but it'd be good to get into the Mission Impossible 3 side of things. But I suppose then, working with JJ, what's that like on a mission film compared to working with John Woo on a mission film? What's the differences in their filmmaking approaches?
Well, they're similar in a lot of ways. I mean, they both, JJ came mainly from television, from writing and directing. So he really and so when we got that script, we also threw out the ending because he had a better idea for the ending, which he was writing with the other two writers as we went on. But JJ really understands story, characters. He comes from that background, right? As a feature film writer, television writer, as a television director. And the studio was just a little nervous about it because it was his first feature film. But I talked to a lot of people we work with in television and said, wow, this guy's really great. He's a shooter. He's going to be able to do that. And he was. I mean, we came up with a game plan, and he knew from directing television how to be economical about shooting. I mean, he had a lot more tools to use in a feature film, but he didn't waste a lot of time. He knew when he needed a story. He knew what he wanted to shoot, and he was economical about it. And it was great as the writer and director coming from that, because he was able then to formulate the ending. And the great thing about it, once the movie started, it helped instruct what the good ending would be. So he and Bob Orsi and Alex Kurtzman wrote that ending, and it was much better than what the original ending they wrote was great. But what they were able to, once we started working with the cast and seeing the movie evolve, they came up with a much better ending at the end. So that was a little bit different because he was the writer. He was one of the writers on the show, and so that made a big difference in how the ending involved. But he was a great guy to work with. Also, he's the kind of guy who he comes up with the concept and idea. He said, "Here's the idea. Go out, get good stuff, and I trust you to do it." So he's great to work with that way. He's a great filmmaker. I mean, you look at the body of his work now, you go, "Wow, of course."
And I'd read a little piece that's not listed on your IMDb, but I was curious for clarification if it's true or not, that you did a little bit of work on Star Trek with him.
Yes, I did. They started Star Trek up, and they had JJ's intention was to be able to do everything himself. There was a opening scene in the first battle where a woman's walking down the corridor. A phaser blast hits the corridor, and she gets sucked out into space. Right?
Yeah.
So that sounds easy. So they asked me to come in and direct the second unit on that. And it was quite complicated because the way I had to design that was I had to put an I-beam on the ceiling. The hole is already blown out of the ship, right? There's a green screen outside. She comes walking down. First, I had to ratchet her up to the ceiling and have big air movers to blow on her. She gets ratcheted up to the ceiling, and then she has to go out that opening, right? Spinning out that opening. So it was just very complex because trying to do 2 ratchets and get her out that hole without injuring her. So as we did the first couple of tests, I said, okay, let's put some foam on the rim of this opening, because if something goes wrong, she's going to hit her head and it's not going to be good. So we did 12 takes. It was almost right, but it wasn't perfect. So on the 13th take, she gets ratcheted up. She's got her fingers on the I-beam, and she let go a second too soon. So when a ratchet went off, she spun, and she hit her head on the way. Just a glancing blow, but she hit her head, but went out to space, and the camera follows her. But that's the one we used because it looked the best. And fortunately, we had padded that hole, so there was no injury. So that was my contribution to that film. It took about 2 weeks to do prepping, rigging, shooting. It took about 2 weeks to get that one shot.
That entire opening of the film is one of the most memorable bits of the entire film. So credit to you for having it part of that. And I'm going to ape off one of Cam's questions about Mission Impossible 2 for Mission Impossible 3. We mentioned obstacles you overcame, and you're sort of overseeing a lot of departments by the sounds of it on Mission Impossible 3. What was sort of an obstacle you overcame for Mission 3?
Well, and I wasn't the only one overseeing. We had great production manager. We had David Witz. We had great ADs, Tommy Gormley, Stratton Leopold, and Paula Wagner. Everybody was involved in this whole process. So it wasn't just me. I just happened to be one of the people who kind of put the overall thing together and kind of made sure all the parts were meshing. I think the biggest obstacle was we were just in so many different places at one time. At one point, we had 1,500 crew members on, in 4 different countries, in the East Coast, Italy. We went to Italy to shoot. We went to Germany, China. So, and there were difficulties in China because, it's not like shooting over here. We had a Chinese crews. So there was interpretation problems, script problems, trying to figure things out. We had big rigs, like over in Italy. We're doing giant descender rigs with Tom going off a wall, dropping 80 feet, inches off the floor. There were a lot of mechanical and visual effects elements to this, like the Bank of China. I don't know if you remember that shot with the Bank of China with the helicopter shot comes over to the bank, the guys are on the roof. Well, that was really the bank. That was really a bank in China. We did the helicopter shot. The biggest problem in China then was there'd be so much smog in the afternoon you couldn't see it. But kind of a blessing in disguise happened. A hurricane came through and blew all the weather out. We were able to take a helicopter and get that shot. But they wouldn't let us bring our own helicopter, so we had to use one of their helicopters. And when you hang a space cam up the side of a helicopter, it changes all the aerodynamics of the helicopter. and it had to be their pilot flying who had never flown with a space cam up. We had our pilot next to him, but the poor guy was sweating blood by the time he get that shot because his hands and legs are very busy on those control. Using your hands and power collective. You're using the anti-torque pedals on the bottom. So the next day we were going to do it one more time. He came out and the blades were off the helicopter. They thought something was wrong with the helicopter because it was flying so differently, but we got the shot. So those are a lot of the challenges. Is just language barriers, different ways and mechanical ways of rigging effects and things like that, like rigging the cable cam up to go over 800 feet of water. And one of the problems we had right before we did the shot, we're trying to get the cable cam to work where Tom's running along the sidewalk there, is that we couldn't get there's these big drums that spin back and forth to take the cable. We couldn't get them to sync up for some reason. And so I'm over there working with it and I couldn't figure it out. I said, Vic, can you come over here and help me? So Vic Armstrong comes over and sitting down and figured it out. And finally we figured out what it was, is the electronics on the drums were rigged at 60 hertz US power, and they use 50 hertz over there. So there was a bunch of adapters and everything had to run in, and literally it got fixed 5 minutes before the first unit came over to shoot that shot.
Wow.
There was always something every week that was going on like that, but that's part of the business. Problems happen and you adapt.
And unforeseen problems you could never predict, like that one.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Who would think about the difference in the electricity, 50 and 60 hertz? It makes a big difference.
Well, I'm aware of how much time we have left with you, Arthur. So I've got 3 questions to take us out with. The first one, I should say, of the last 3 is about the Mission Impossible films, and that is just sort of looking back on your time with the 2 Mission films. What was sort of your favorite moment from working on those films?
Wow, I would say Wrap Day on Mission Impossible 2 and Wrap Day on Mission Impossible 3.
It's done.
No, I couldn't say that there were great moments. I would say that on Mission 2, when we completed that motorcycle rig that worked, and no one got injured, and we knew it was going to come out great, it was great. On Mission 2, one of my other great days of feeling was we had Tom at the TWA hangar down in LAX, and he was on a descender rig going 80 feet out of the beams at the top of this thing and stopping 6 inches from camera. I was happy when that day was complete. The knife in the eye, that was an exciting day to complete. And yeah, I know there's a lot of moments like that. Working with John and with JJ, I mean, every day was always fun for me, because you had plotted and you'd planned and schemed, but there were always things. The great thing about filmmaking, there were always little things that would come up every day that would make what you planned better. That's the stardust of movie making, and I think that was the exciting thing, is that you would plot and plan as best as you could, but then there's a certain magic that happens when the cast gets there. Their interpretations of the words come to life. The director puts his input in, and you see it all come together, and it's 120% better than what you thought it could be. And I think that's why filmmaking is such a drug, and you never get over it, because it's not like going into a bank and working every day. I mean, there's a lot more stress, but you are making it. Truly is magic what comes together when everybody's creative talents meld, and it turns out to be something bigger than you had imagined yourself it could be.
It sounds like you had a lot of anxiety to get through on the set of those Mission films, but in a good way. Like you felt that sort of happiness when it came through successfully, and that's the main thing.
Oh yeah. You get in your car at the end of the day and you go, can't believe we did that. That's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see it. Your biggest stress is, as an AD, as a producer, anything, is that you just want everybody to go home at the end of the day the same way they got there, uninjured and happy that they came to work. And when you can do that at the end of the day, you feel good about everything you've done. Everybody goes home in the same condition they left or better. You've done your job.
Well, moving away from the Mission films, we've just had the writer's strike, the actors strike, that's all been wrapped up now, so productions are going back into full swing. What are you working on at the moment? What's on the horizon for you?
I'm in development right now with a couple of producers on a project that's being funded out of Asia, and it's an action thriller. And the funny thing is, that release about this film is it may be released overseas and work its way about here. That's what we're talking about, the disruptive technologies.
Sure.
Anymore, things don't always develop out of the U.S. and then go overseas. Now, what you're seeing a lot is a lot of the money is over in Asia. And then it's going to be released there first, and then it's going to make its way back over here, or it doesn't necessarily goes theatrical, but it goes to Netflix or to Amazon. And a lot of these companies over in Asia, this is a company we're working with, that's the model they're using, is they're not even starting out with a studio. They're producing these projects on their own, and then they're licensing them as they go. So this is a project we've been working on for 3 years now, and it looks like it's about to come together. So it's going to be really cool. It's something that's never been done before. It's an action thriller, and it's really cool. So I'm really excited about that.
Awesome.
You're teasing us there, and I like that. That's action thrillers are our kind of thing. So
Okay.
we'll keep an eye out there. And
This won't disappoint you.
no, don't you worry about that. We will have a great time when it gets here. But the last question I have for you, and this has been asked to everyone that's ever been on the show, including one of your colleagues on Mission Impossible 3, Dan Mindell, when he came on a couple of years ago.
I love Dan. He's a great man.
He's a great guy. We spoke about Star Trek as well. That he shot on that one. The question, Arthur Anderson, the question for you, sir, is what is your favorite spy film of all time?
Wow, spy film. Well, I would have to say spy action thriller is the Mission Impossible series. I mean, I've never seen a franchise that has been derived from a TV series that I loved when I grew up on. I mean, I was an avid watcher every week, and has been able to not only conceptually fulfill all the requirements of being an action thriller, but ramp it up on every motion picture and just get better and better. And so that's my favorite mystery thriller action franchise.
If I could press you then to pick a favorite of the films so far, there's been 7 Mission Impossible films, so we can get one film on the record as being your favorite spy film. Could you pick one of the Mission films?
You know, I couldn't, because each one has great things unto itself. I mean, it's a franchise, but each one has great elements because of the director's vision and the way he took the audience through each film. I have to look at it as a body of work. It's kind of like saying, take Lord of the Rings, what's your favorite one? I really couldn't there, because you have to look at the narrative and then the arc that goes across all those films. And I couldn't pick one Lord of the Rings. I like all 3 of them, and I have to take all of them as a group. So I'd have to say the franchise as a whole is my favorite.
Okay.
And to be fair, no matter what film you said, it would have been correct. Like, everyone, I think, has a favorite Mission Impossible, and every one of them has their own group of fans.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, sir, to illuminate Mission Impossible 2 and 3 with us. And I wish you all the best with the film you're working on. Looking forward to catching that when it gets round to us. But yeah, until next time, Arthur Anderson, thanks for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks. Had a great time speaking with you guys.
No, our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
There you go, folks. That was our chat with Mr. Arthur Anderson. I want to thank Arthur once again for being on the show and sharing the stories of Mission Impossible 2 and 3. We know you love those films as much as we love those films, and we love hearing stories about them even more. But let's talk about some stories. Cam, what did you think?
Well, this was a really interesting one, and it's kind of my favorite type of interview in a way, where it is a film school class in a way with great storytelling. It's interesting Arthur mentioned he originally worked or dabbled in stand-up comedy, because he can very much deliver like a story that really contains all of the elements of the information he needs to convey in a very fun and inviting way. But a lot of people, when they hear first assistant director, they don't really know what that means. They know what a director is, they know what a screenwriter is, but I thought Arthur did a great job at kind of explaining the logistical side of his job and how, for example, he helps work with the director to break down a sequence and figure out how to make these things happen. And for example, using the motorcycle chase in Mission Impossible 2 or, the knife to the eye sequence in Mission Impossible 2 as well, he's able to explain exactly what he's doing to help achieve those moments.
And I think it's an important thing that this show does from time to time. And I really encourage it when we can do it, is to have that sort of film school ethos going on where maybe if you're listening to this and you're thinking about getting into film, you might actually learn a thing or two. I'm certainly learning throughout the process of doing these interviews and learning about how films are made. When I started doing them 4 years ago, I didn't even know what a producer did.
Sure. I mean, even now, producer is somewhat of a nebulous phrase.
Sure, but that to one side, I think I'm learning along the way, and I hope you all are too. And one thing I think I've learned, and it goes to show, and I mentioned it in the intro about the trust for having Arthur back for 2 films. But changing directors, it's not as if it's it was John Woo's crew that came back; it was a different team, and they wanted him back to do some work. And I just think it goes to show, like, you can tell that Arthur is very fond of working with Tom and the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume that fondness goes both ways.
I would have to imagine so if he's being brought back for Mission Impossible 3. But like, it's interesting to hear him just talk about the level of preparation that goes into these films. Because when we watch action movies, we want excitement, edgier seat thrills, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the kind of thing you necessarily think of as being so incredibly detailed in terms of the breakdown. You think of like improvisation, keeping people on their toes, and yet to hear him talk about it and the very specific vision of John Woo, and then also what J.J. Abrams was doing with his directorial debut, the amount of preparation and anxiety involved in staging these sequences. Arthur would say that like his favorite day on the sets was the wrap party, basically because it was over and he was finished dealing with things like the knife to the eye, or those moments where you're like, well, we prepared the hell out of this, but I hope it works.
Well, it just goes to show, and I think that's part of the magic as well, is seeing how this stuff actually gets made. Because it is all well and good to sort of say, oh, I want to have this knife maybe going into someone's eye, but how do you actually put that together?
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a team. It's not just Arthur, isn't it? Many skilled people that went into putting that scene together, which he credits them too. And I understand that completely, that just wanting the pressure off to in a way, because you've done your job, but also there is I would assume a little bit of an intoxicating nature about all of this. How do you rise to the challenge? And you finish Mission Impossible 2, and then your phone goes off and the Mission Impossible theme starts playing again, and you're like, hey, fancy another mission? And you're like, oh, I wonder what we could get up to this time.
Yeah, and he named his favorite spy film as the entire Mission Impossible franchise, just the entirety of what that franchise has achieved. And so for him to be someone who so much adores the level of action and the ambition of that franchise, to have made 2 installments must have been exciting. He didn't necessarily say like this was a dream come true to make these movies, but the way he speaks about that franchise as a whole, it's very clear that there was genuine love in terms of achieving what he did.
Yeah, and I think every sequence that he was involved with, I think you'd all agree with me, was highly successful. They had imagination, and I don't think there was a lot of no's on the set of Mission Impossible. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a yes and type set.
And it's interesting to hear him talk about J.J. Abrams being so unbelievably prepared that they were like well ahead of schedule. Like, It was someone who, and it's interesting because I've heard differing things about J.J. Abrams. I've heard in some cases he's very indecisive and wants a lot of ideas to work from and try to figure it out as he goes. Mm-hmm. That's not what I heard here, though, from Arthur, which is really interesting to hear how he was so well planned out that they were just like shooting through this thing ahead of schedule. And I mean, when you watch Mission Impossible 3, it's incredibly confident as a blockbuster, and that's so often not the case. Usually, when you see a blockbuster directed by a first-time filmmaker or someone new to that world, they are kind of anonymous feeling.
Well, it's the antithesis of us.
They wouldn't have been as concerned with the knife to the eye sequence if they were filming us.
Yeah, they just would have, maybe like the Mishka and Grishka in Octopussy, where they're just throwing knives. They just would have done that, basically, and just you would throw them at each other.
Yeah, and they mess up the first time, and they're like, okay, get the other one.
Yeah, he's got 2, folks, so we can try it again. Just shoot him from the other side.
Get the provocateur.
One eye cam. That doesn't quite work. Yeah. Well, you don't need both eyes to edit the show, Cam.
That's true. And only half a brain.
Well, no comment on that front. I'll let you all figure that one out. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with Arthur and talking about the Mission films with him. He's clearly a man who is passionate about filmmaking and loved working with those teams. So much so he went back into the madness a second time.
It was also just great to hear some other film stories from him, talking about Face Off and working with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, and also filming that sequence of the woman being sucked into space at the start of Star Trek 2009. The thing about Arthur is he's worked on a lot of interesting, cool productions, and so little stories like that, those nuggets, I also just absolutely adore hearing.
Which is, I mean, I think we did briefly talk about it in the discussion with him, but that scene is quite pivotal in Star Trek 2009, kind of setting the tone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because it's kind of the first time in Star Trek where they've acknowledged that sound doesn't exist in space.
Yeah, that is 100% true, yeah.
It took them 50 years to figure that one out, folks.
I mean, I like to think it was always the case, but they never specified it from an omniscient point of view.
That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, it's a great little sequence, a little bit of horror in that. Overall, a great intro to Star Trek 2009. But this isn't a Star Trek podcast, much as I try to make it one.
You'll succeed one day.
One of these days, Trek Hards will happen. But yeah, wonderful to speak to Arthur. It's been lovely talking about Mission Impossible 3. This isn't our last mission by any sense of the word, folks. We will be lighting that fuse again in a few months' time, I imagine. But until then, Cam, what have we got coming up next week?
Yeah, another big movie, actually. We're going to talk about 1992's Sneakers, starring Robert Redford, Sidney Poitier, and a whole bunch of other fun stars. This is a big ensemble, early computer hacking heist thriller that has become a bit of a cult favorite.
Well, indeed. I mean, not only is it sort of tied into Mission Impossible in its own way, a lot of connections to the Brian De Palma film, which we'll talk about in the review. We've also got a SpyMaster interview for that one too, so look out for it. Your mission, folks, should you choose to accept it, is to empty out your Scrabble tiles onto the table, decipher the code, and join us next week as we take a look at 1992's Sneakers. We know you've wanted us to talk about this film for quite a while. We're excited to actually finally get down to it and talk about more River Phoenix and Sidney Poitier.
Yeah, sign me up.
Sign us both up. Well, folks, if you liked what you heard on the show, please consider joining us over on Patreon. Help support SpyHards, keeping the roof on here at SpyHards HQ. And of course, paying for Cam's extensive medical bills at the hands of me.
They're trying to give me the other half a brain.
He desperately needs it, folks. And make sure you follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next time, folks, you'll find Cam and I getting eye rolls from Greg Grunberg in the corner.